Hi guys, it's Phil
And Liam
from Die Hard on a Blank, and we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
as well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So, if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
Then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
visit patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe. Welcome to 48 Hours of Buddy Movies, the podcast where we explore the influence of 48 hours on action cinema, one buddy movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Lethal Weapon.
It's a buddy movie with a family man and a burnout.
And because this is our special crossover Christmas episode, it's also... Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Lethal Weapon.
It's Die Hard a year before it was Die Hard. I messed that up because this is very confusing.
Yes, you're getting a double bubble here, double trouble, doubling down. It's our Christmas special. This, you know, this is a 48 hours episode, but it's also somewhat of a Die Hard on a Blank episode because they're just inexorably interlinked, aren't they? To some extent, I think in the culture, these two movies are constantly being compared, and there's so much that they have in common. But fundamentally, this is one of our two free samples.
Yes.
Our two Christmas gifts. This is our Christmas special.
So this episode is going to come out on our Die Hard on a Blank feed and free on the Patreon 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. But the next one, Beverly Hills Cop in January, you gotta pay for.
Cough up.
Cough up.
Cough up.
You can pay in Krugerrands if you have to. I don't care.
We take all currencies. Yeah. So for anybody that's just joining us, let's just talk a little bit about the format of the new show, 48 Hours of Buddy Movies, which is going to be 48 hour-long, approximately, episodes about 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 smash hit action comedy thriller 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, which we discussed in our previous episode. It is going to be, as Liam was just saying, that will be out and in full effect in January, and thereafter you will have to subscribe to get movies like Beverly Hills Cop, Big Trouble in Little China, Running Scared, RoboCop, yada, yada, yada.
Yes.
So stick with us for that. Now, this movie, Lethal Weapon, I would suggest, I think that Lethal Weapon is to you, Liam Billingham, what Die Hard is to me. Would you say that's...
I would say that's fair? That is absolutely accurate. Now, let's be clear. I co-host a podcast about Die Hard. So this is not like Die Hard is not great or amazing or whatever, but this is like one of the 5 most formative movies for me ever made.
So take us back in time and tell us where your relationship with this film started and where it's gone over the years and just why it is so personally important to you.
Well, okay, so if I remember correctly, and I was young, I was like, this movie comes out in what, 87?
Mm-hmm.
So I have this memory of being at my cousin's house and there being a VHS of Lethal Weapon 2. And the photo on the back was Riggs and Murtaugh in their car at the beginning of the movie. And like as we talked about in the last episode, like a 5-paragraph description.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? And that cover was Riggs and Murtaugh, and like they both looked so cool. Riggs in particular, because all present history aside, Mel Gibson was the coolest guy alive in the late 80s and early 90s. So I remember seeing that and being like, I want to watch this movie. And then I think what happened is my dad was like, okay, but you got to see the first one first. And I actually think a lot of people might have a stronger relationship to Lethal Weapon 2 because it was a monster versus Lethal Weapon. But I think there was a bit of a negotiation with my mom. She's like, it's R-rated, like, I don't know. And so this might be the first R-rated movie I ever saw.
And you said you were about how old?
I would have been
roughly?
8 or 9.
Okay.
9 probably. And it was like a light bulb went off when I saw this movie. I'm pretty sure I saw Lethal Weapon first. There's a chance I saw Lethal Weapon 2 because it was just out. And I just was like completely, totally sold. And it's one of the few movies that as I've gotten older has not... Sometimes you look back on the things you love and you sometimes go like, oh, that's for kids, right? But because I saw it at such a young age and it's so hard. The first Lethal Weapon movie goes so hard that like I watched it a week ago and then I put it on last night and I was like, this movie has not aged an iota for me. And it's a really formative movie for my relationship with my dad because like, as folks who've listened to the show may have guessed, he's not around anymore. He died when I was youngish, but like, we didn't have the easiest relationship, but we did when we watched movies. And Lethal Weapon is like one of those. Some people have older siblings that like get them into things, but my dad was like the older sibling who got me into movies. So it was like this, it was Indiana Jones, it was Bridge Over the River Kwai, it was The Godfather when I was 11. Like he just was like, strap in, kid. It was kind of a product of the time. Also, like I feel like dads when we were kids were like, "Well, I want to watch what I want to watch." So hopefully you come along for the ride. And it like really was a entryway drug into like adult oriented movies for me.
And in the decades subsequent, what's the relationship been with it over time, and both with the first movie and the wider franchise?
I don't rewatch these movies all the time. They're not like, I'm not really, with the exception of a few things, like I'm not a yearly rewatcher, but that's probably because in high school I watched this movie once a month, maybe more.
Oh wow!
Oh yeah,
okay.
I was obsessed. It was like a comfort put on after school kind of thing.
Can you quantify what it is or was about this movie, Lethal Weapon, that so captivated you?
Well, I think I was an action head, and I think I thought, like, guns were cool. I still do in the movie setting. In the real world, yeah, but, like, in the movie setting, I was like, oh, this is cool. I think I just thought they were really exciting. I think I thought they were funny, but I will say this. 2 words. Mel Gibson. Like, everyone talks about how Tom Cruise runs in movies now. I'm sorry, but Mel Gibson running was the Tom Cruise of that time. He just was this, like, crazy, intense figure, but also very funny. I mean, like, this Lethal Weapon and Lethal Weapon 2, and to some extent the sequels, but especially the first 2, there's, like, no greater movie star performance, I think. I just think they're, like, he's so locked in, he's so funny, and he kind of invented the archetype of the, like, burnout cop that you still see in things all the time.
But the interesting thing about that, and we'll get to that when we dig into the heroes in a bit more detail, is that he's young and a burnout.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to the sort of trope of the, 50, 60-year-old that's 2 weeks to retirement burnout, right? The Robert Duvall in Falling Down type character that you see iterations of that all the time, especially in sort of noir. So if I may, I'll just tell you a little bit about my history with it, because similar to what you're saying with the second one, I saw the third one first.
Interesting.
Which
did you see it in the theater?
I did not.
Okay.
I had it on. I think I must have rented it and then I very quickly bought it, because this is an era where you could now buy VHS.
94?
92, I want to say,
right,
is when it came out. And there were two movies, I had two VHS tapes that I pretty much wore out. One was Lethal Weapon 3, and the other was Beverly Hills Cop and Beverly Hills Cop 2, which were on the same video cassette.
Oh, wow.
And this would have been when I was 13, 14, there or thereabouts. And I was so into these movies that for a time, I mistakenly was like, hey, I want to be a cop.
Yes.
I was like, oh, this looks so rad.
Yeah.
I really want to be a cop. And then I realized, I was like, oh, first of all, you would suck at that. And second, you don't want to be a cop.
Yeah,
you just love these movies.
Yeah, totally.
You just love action movies.
Right.
So, but for a time, I was so like gorging on these types of movies that it was like literally pushing me into it, which I actually pursued for a year. I was actually quite serious about it before I realized that would have been a terrible idea, and I was completely temperamentally unsuited for that.
Yeah.
Profession.
Well, these are fairy tales, right? In a way, they're very like
kind of comic book maybe comic book is the wrong term. Pulp, sort of pulp novel. Or graphic novel type world, slightly heightened, slightly extreme. Although Lethal Weapon's interesting because it kind of marries some sense of realism with the mythic, which we'll talk about. But the point, just wrapping up my history with it, was Lethal Weapon 3 was my entry point, which is slightly softer, because by that point Riggs isn't like suicidal. He's still like zany and eccentric and but he isn't at the level of darkness that he is in the first movie. It's a little bit more accessible. Yeah,
I would say so.
In that regard.
It's when the formula became like, we could make 10 of these.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they did not.
Pesci in there, so that sort of balances out some of it makes it a little bit more kind of comedic and stuff. So for me, Lethal Weapon 3, and it might be sacrilege to say this in certain quarters, especially to our friend Rob Hackett, who will be appearing again on our Deep Rising episode, because we had this conversation with him. Shout out to Rob.
He's not a fan.
He's not a fan of. He's a real purist about the first one, and I totally get it. But I saw the third one first, and then worked my way back.
Interesting.
So I kind of came at it from a different angle. And I love this movie. It's another one like 48 Hours that has had a big influence on my work. It's still cited a lot as a reference. I remember one of the first projects I was doing, and my agent was like, make it more like, think more Lethal Weapon. It's just one of those, like, it's just shorthand for a kind of tone and style, and an approach to a story that is still massively influential to this day.
Totally. And sometimes I forget there was like a couple season TV series that I've not seen a frame of. I remember sort of being like, I want the movies to be the things. It's the same thing with Star Wars shows. I with the exception of one or two,
this is happening a lot now. There's like a True Lies show, or I don't know if it was still on. And there's
I think it did a season.
A weird thing where there's like an Equalizer show at the same time as there's an Equalizer film franchise, and the two things kind of concurrently coexist separately. And of course, that was based on another TV show from a different different era. So, I never, with no disrespect to the TV show, I never watched it, but I did think it was kind of cool and meta that Damon Wayans of Shane Black's Last Boy Scout
plays the Murtaugh role,
would end up being in it, right? So they are kind of in this weird cyclical conversation. But let's put this in a little bit of context with our fast facts,
or our just the facts.
Just the facts.
Wait, I didn't do my bit that I wanted to do.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
What time is it? It's very early in the morning, right?
It's 9:59 a.m.
Just to celebrate Martin Riggs's burnout. way of living, drinking a Coors Light, I have to just very carefully, just quickly open my Coors Light here. Oh no, this always happens. I can't open
Liam's
these things.
naked, smoking a cigarette and cracking open a Coors Light here. That's how we roll. He clambered out
I'm just letting it drip onto my chest as I light a cigarette and give my cat moldy
then shoot
old
your
cat,
TV,
yeah, or my dog,
whatever he
exactly.
does.
And he's just, laying in bed with a cigarette.
Are you the
lit.
burnout of the, and I'm the stable family man? Or I think we're both somewhat, we're both a little bit of,
yeah,
we're both stable family man, but we have the psychosis of
Do you really want to jump?
Fast facts, or indeed just the facts. Let's just put that.
Coors Light is terrible. I forgot how bad it was.
Little bit of context. All right. So, Lethal Weapon is of course directed by Richard Donner, who also produced with the ubiquitous Joel Silver, also of 48 Hours and Die Hard. We'll talk about him more many times, but in a little bit more detail later. It was written, of course, by Shane Black, kind of coming out the gate, storming Hollywood.
Maybe a patron saint of this podcast.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about him, of course. It stars Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, Gary Busey, many others. Shot by Stephen Goldblatt, edited by Stuart Baird, another very important figure.
Executive decision.
I
don't think I realized he edited
Director,
this.
U.S. Marshals, edited a ton of these movies. His name is going to come up a lot as well. It was distributed by Warner Brothers and came out on March the 6th, 1987.
Oh, wow. So I was 4 years old when this, 4.5 when this, no, I just turned 4 when this movie came out. Wow.
And this was really interesting, and especially in comparison to last week's movie, 48 Hours, of which it was around the same budget. The budget of this film, do you know what it was?
15
million.
Wow, I did not know. I swear I did not look that up.
Box office 120.2 million.
Yeah, I mean,
that's even bigger than 48 Hours, which was, I think, a budget of 12 and grossed about 78.
Wow.
Also a monster hit.
Well, we should say this is 5 years later, so the genre has kind of like got its tentacles in the culture a little bit, right?
And people are open, nowadays it's hard to think of a movie that would be, as you said, like goes this hard, and would be such a mainstream popular hit, because it was a different era of filmmaking, but a monster hit, making over $100 million in profit.
I just occurred to me that a few years ago now, I podded with our friend Blake Howard about this movie. He reached out to me because I'd listened to another podcast, which will not be named, but they were doing a Lethal Weapon 2 thing, and they were like, well, we have to do Lethal Weapon first because you need Lethal Weapon to get Lethal Weapon 2, but we all know that Lethal Weapon 2 is better than Lethal Weapon 1. And I was like, excuse me? Because in some weird way, this is like the Batman Begins movie. Like, there's something like an origin story in this one.
Right.
And I think that, like, it's bleak, and it's bleaker than 48 Hours, in my opinion, which is a dark movie. But like, and I have theories about what this movie is saying, and is very substantive. But I think that part of the reasons these movies still resonate for me, and I think you've said this is Donner's influence off mic, is that they each contend with social issues. Like, there's a real social conscience to this movie. The cop stuff aside, like, there's every one of these movies takes something on.
And I want to dig into that in a lot more detail when we get there, because it is culturally fascinating, and where the movies went and the issues that they tackled. I don't think Shane Black is like an issue-driven storyteller. I think he goes for the more mythic, and he loves dime store detective novels and all of that type of stuff. But it is interesting you mentioned the Batman Begins thing, because I think that's why I think of it as slightly using the term or equating comic books with Lethal Weapon might kind of give you a bit of a skid, like to be like, what? But I think that's sort of what I'm saying. It's like the Phoenix rising hero, right? Rising from the ashes, has this really interesting backstory. But we'll stick a pin in that for a sec. We'll get into it when we dig into those sections. I do want to do.
Do you want some of my Coors Light?
I'm good.
Okay.
It's still a little early for me because I'm just in the bath. I'm in my bubble bath. But
I want to talk about that scene. I want to talk about every scene. Why does he shave? He has to shave because he has to.
Well, I guess they try and make him look
Do you know what's
older?
Do you know what's sad? Do you
Young-
want to have a moment of sadness? He's younger. Danny Glover.
I hate this thing. I hate this
Let me
thing in
finish the
culture, though.
sentence.
Go
Danny
on.
Glover is younger than us now when he made Lethal Weapon.
This is such an annoying thing in like culture that's like, hey, want to feel old?
Yeah.
No, I obviously don't.
I don't mind being old. I just think that when I was a kid, Danny Glover was the oldest man alive in this movie.
I think the thing that happens for us, it's sort of like Bruce, like I'm older than Bruce Willis was in Die Hard, but in my mind, that will never be the case.
Well, this is something we've talked about before. Men that generation looked older than men our generation do. It's fashion, it's lifestyle, it's a whole bunch of things. But like Bruce Willis, like was bald,
right, was kind of starting to recede. But I think speaking of Bruce Willis, I think as this is a crossover episode, we would be remiss if we didn't compare Lethal Weapon with Die Hard in a section that we like to call
Die Hard DNA.
Now, the first one, we mentioned him before, and this, I've often say this to my wife when I'm saying, like, what movie should we watch?
Why isn't it Cobra?
What I'm actually saying is what Joel Silver produced movie should we...
Being married, I could marry you. I don't know about anyone else, though.
It's a rough road for... Fortunately, he produced a lot of incredible movies. Yeah. This was produced by Joel Silver. It was scored, same producer as Die Hard. It was scored by Michael Kamen, the same composer. And you can really... I was listening to the soundtrack this morning, and the bells are in there.
The score to this movie
stuff
is so powerful.
They're very similar,
yeah.
while clearly distinct.
That like sort of swell that he does with a lot of instruments as the action mounts.
He's particularly amazing at suspense.
Yes,
Michael Kamen. Multiple cast members appear in both films, and some of them are more obvious, like Mary Ellen Trainor.
Yes.
Right?
Kind of the queen of this podcast.
Yeah, the queen of this podcast. We also have to give a shout out to... The Bush. Grandel Bush
God.
is in the house as Detective Boyette.
I like this new bit. I like this.
You'll remember him. Well, I think once you get like a character actor that we love, like certain people, Fred Dalton Thompson, he deserves an air horn.
Yeah.
JT Walsh, he deserves an air horn.
JT Walsh is like going to get a like a trumpet.
He deserves a star screen level coronation. But Grandel Bush, of course, plays Agent Johnson, plays Detective Boyette in this, and then weirdly, as we've talked about, plays a differently named detective in Lethal Weapon 2.
But you don't even know. I would assume it's the same
really
guy.
Weird.
But the vibe of the precinct is so different in Lethal Weapon 2 versus Lethal Weapon 1. Like it's really
a depressing place in the first movie.
In the first movie. Well, the first movie is much bleaker. The first movie's
no one wants to be there, but as it goes on, it becomes a bit more warm.
Should we just watch all the Lethal Weapon movies right now? Where are you on 4?
I love it.
Yeah, I like 4 too.
I love it.
It's really grown on me.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I love how it ends. Mary Ellen Trainor, who played who played the psychologist Stephanie Woods in these movies, plays, of course, the news anchor Gail Wallins in Die Hard, and goes on to appear in Ricochet, playing the same character, spinning off the Die Hard universe, similar to what we're doing here with with our extended
universe.
You're
the Mary Ellen Trainor.
I like to think so.
Yeah, I've always said that about you.
Al Leong.
Yeah.
Of course.
Endo,
and Uli, the candy thief, plays...
There's a restaurant
plays a henchman like nobody's business.
David Chang restaurant in New York City where you can get noodles, and the walls are covered with pictures of Al Leong.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's really cool. I went in there and I was like, Al Leong! And my wife was like, what are you talking about?
Absolute legend.
I love Endo.
He's great.
He apologizes to Riggs. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, there's a moment where he's like, he's kind of very talented because he's able to give just that little bit of humanity in these stock henchman type characters.
Yeah.
He
always
finds a moment,
him.
for a little bit of texture. There were some other interesting ones as well. This one I didn't know about. Selma Archard, who plays the Silent Night Encourager. She's a cop.
Yeah.
I think she's blonde-haired lady.
Yeah.
She's encouraging the cops to sing Silent Night in the police station.
They're pretty good.
She also appears in Die Hard as a Nakatomi employee, so look out for if you're eagle-eyed. Look out for her.
That?
I hadn't.
Okay,
this was just from research. Cheryl Baker, who's come up a few times, not the famous and much beloved national treasure in the UK from Bucks Fizz, but the American performer Cheryl Baker plays forgive me, Girl in Shower 1 and Woman. She is the lady who is interrupted mid-coitus in Die Hard. You remember during the office raid scene.
A film produced by Joel Silver, ladies and gentlemen.
And also Terry Lynn Doss, who plays Girl in Shower 2 in Lethal Weapon, plays the woman at the airport in Die Hard who's the spandex-clad kisser.
Who jumps on the guy.
Who jumps on the dude. So quite a few. Now, the other one, and I think he might deserve an air horn, actually.
I think I know who this is.
It's our guy. We mentioned him last week. It's Matt Landers in the house.
The best part of this bit is I'm not going to take that sound effect and actually put it on. It's just going to play in the background. I love it.
The reason Matt Landers deserves that is because he achieved the trifecta of being in 48 Hours, Lethal Weapon, and Die Hard. He played Bob, the forger, the guy who helps Nolte forge the release to get Murphy out of prison. He famously plays the SWAT Captain Mitchell in Die Hard. If you want to do the line,
sit in the car.
There you go. Now, but it does come with a caveat, which in a sense is why you're confused, because he only appears in the director's cut of Lethal Weapon. In the scene, in the scene where, which is the version I have. The version I have, which is a UK DVD,
is it a DVD?
Is only the director's cut. I can't watch the theatrical version.
I don't know if I've ever seen the director's cut, to be honest. Is it longer?
We'll touch on it just for briefly as this has come up. So the director's cut is I believe, is 7 minutes longer and features 2 completely different scenes. One of which was cut for pretty obvious reasons. About 15 minutes into the film, once Riggs has been established, there's a scene where this is very uncomfortable. There is a sniper at a school.
I've seen this. Yes, I know about this.
And Riggs goes in, who is kind of in a fatalistic state of mind anyway, and basically takes the guy out.
Interesting.
From distance with like a Beretta, right? And he's in a window. It's a very difficult shot. Okay. So it's establishing the idea, first of all, that Riggs kind of doesn't give a fuck and is really heroic, but also that he is an incredibly well-trained crack shot.
Right.
Who is able to it's a classic, the Shane Black thing of like, he's the guy that can deal with the problem that no one else can deal with.
Yeah.
And Matt Landers appears very briefly as an LAPD guy who interacts with Riggs in that scene.
Okay.
So technically he does like tick off all 3. There's also an additional scene that was cut where Riggs is sort of like cruising the streets and picks up a sex worker, but it's not because he wants to have sex with her. He just wants company, and he brings her home to watch the Three Stooges. And it's really kind of tragic.
So I've seen those 2 scenes on like YouTube. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and seen the director's cut of this movie.
The pacing is a little different because of that. They're good scenes, but I'm pretty happy.
I don't know if they need them.
No, you definitely didn't, because the Christmas tree scene kind of achieves the same purpose as this horrible sort of school sniper scenario. The other thing that I think we would be remiss if we didn't say in terms of the connections between the 2 movies is that Shane Black came up with the title Die Hard, which was the original working title of the Last Boy Scout script. And Joel Silver had always wanted to call a movie Die Hard, and had this movie that was in development that was based on the novel Nothing Lasts Forever, and they didn't want to use that title, and he asked Shane if he could use the title Die Hard for what became Die Hard, and he agreed. So Shane Black, in a way, kind of has his fingerprints.
Well, it's a great title
in Die Hard, and so perfect, obviously, for that character and for that movie. But we would be remiss if we didn't mention that as well.
Was Mel Gibson considered for the part of John McClane?
I believe he was, along with like about 800 other leading men.
I could see how like his name probably
and
came
Bruce
up.
Willis was considered for this for Riggs.
Interesting. I think it went the right direction.
It all worked. Obviously, it all worked out for the best. In some ways, you could kind of see it like in an alternate universe. I think both could have worked, actually. Both had in the acting chops, I think, to pull off, and the charm, and the sense of humor, because they're both really, really strong actors, but they both also have a great deft touch for comedy, which both of those parts require.
And of course, Bruce Willis would later work with Richard Donner on 16 Blocks.
Right, which is sort of an unofficial Die Hard sequel.
Yeah, I like that movie.
A movie that we'll be doing that a lot of people really like.
David Morse.
My guy.
Your guy.
My guy.
It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you, General.
What an actor.
But like he said, it's over.
Amazing.
I just got goosebumps thinking about a different movie.
So, but because this is a 48 Hours of Buddy Movies episode, fundamentally, we should just talk about our new section of the show, working title, 48 Chromosomes.
I gotta think of a thing for that. It's
So
a tough one. You've really put a challenge. Die Hard DNA is pretty easy. But...
this just has so much of both, right? Because so 48 Chromosomes is where we trace this back to 48 Hours and the specific connections between the two films. So, of course, we have mismatched partners forced to work together for a common goal. That's pretty much the headline for most of these buddy movies. They hate each other at first, but gosh darn it, eventually they find a place of mutual understanding. Now, their police captain is a jerk, as he is in both films, but he goes on to become, that's Captain Ed Murphy, played by Steve Kahan, who becomes nicer and much more lovable as the series goes on. But in this one, he's kind of a prick. He's like, oh, fuck it, he's psychologically disturbed. I don't give a shit, just whatever. He's really dismissive of Mary Ellen Trainor's character, the psychologist. This was an era of filmmaking as well, an era that was like therapy is like witchcraft.
Yeah,
it's like it's also
silly. Still true in the city of Boston.
But although this film does touch on some more, it's evolving its sensitivities, isn't it, with the character that we talked about, the Jack Thebeau character, who's questioning what masculinity means in the 80s. You've got car chases, shootouts, prolonged comic interludes. We talked about how that's kind of a staple of the genre, as in the long scene in the redneck bar in 48 Hours. Here you have things like the Christmas tree scene and, of course, the rooftop jump scene. Those extended,
you really want to jump?
Extended comic set pieces. We have one of my favorites that we've talked about in the last episode, the walk and talk through a police parking structure. Give this to me. I love it.
Yeah.
Fist fights and or screaming matches between the two heroes.
Yes.
Right, that happens pretty early at the point when Murtaugh still thinks that Riggs is faking and he goes full on ape shit at him.
Yeah.
Constant profanity, gratuitous nudity, Joel Silver producing. Anything else you spotted in terms of like how this would connect to 48 Hours?
Well, one thing it does is that the final moment where the villain is vanquished is in 48 Hours. It's in steam, but in Lethal Weapon, it's like in a very wet scenario, and the colors are very vibey and very enhanced.
Right. Yeah.
There's sort of a showdown between the villain and the hero. That's like in 48 Hours, it's pretty quick, but it had like in the same way that like a Western would end with like mano a mano.
Yeah,
it has that quality too. And I would say that there's a kind of like way that these movies do not make you like the villains, but give them enough screen time to make them feel like credible characters.
So what you're just describing, I have this sort of term for it, of the final showdown, which is a scene that I would call it's just you and me now, Jack.
Yeah,
scene,
totally.
Right, John Wick literally has that kind of happen, right, at the end, but usually it is in some evocative location, and it becomes a mano a mano,
like Speed
showdown between the two of them. So that's definitely like a staple of the genre, and in both of those films, it's actually three of them because it's Riggs and Murtaugh and Mr. Joshua, the villain, and in 48 Hours, it's Nolte and Eddie Murphy and James Remar. They're all in that scene, but Eddie Murphy is basically surplus to requirements in the way that one is structured, right? So definitely kind of traces back the lineage. But let's now that we've sort of set the table and we've given our shout outs, let's dig into the meat of this.
Oh boy.
In Anatomy of an Action Movie. So the first tenet of try not to spill your Coors Light there.
We live in a toilet world.
Of Anatomy of an Action Movie is the premise. So the premise, let's try, and I'm trying to do these off the cuff.
Off the cuff, off the top, off the dome.
So let me. Okay, so in Los Angeles. At
Christmas time.
Christmas time. We should have mentioned that, of course, in the Die Hard DNA.
I think I love LA at Christmas time because of Shane Black.
It's an LA Christmas movie.
Yes.
Just like Die Hard. We meet a couple of characters. who are both LAPD detectives. One of them is a narcotics officer, played by Martin Riggs, played by Mel Gibson, and the other is a homicide sergeant, Roger Murtaugh, played by Danny Glover. They're in very different situations in their life. Roger Murtaugh is a married, stable family man. He has 3 kids. He has a nice big house. He has a boat, and Martin Riggs lives in a trailer on the beach and is basically suicidal, right? But because of the
drinking beer in the morning,
because of the death
smoking
of his
cigarettes.
wife, and the department think that Riggs, who is basically an outcast, is faking his psychosis in order to get a pension and retire. So he's a bit of a pariah in the department and is forced to partner with Murtaugh, who doesn't want anything to do with him either. And so that's sort of that. It's why this is a tricky one too. This isn't a high concept movie, so this is why it's hard to distill the premise. But essentially, it's 2 completely mismatched guys who get drawn into an investigation that at first seems relatively routine. The death of one of Roger's friend's daughter, who has fallen from a great height and died in suspicious circumstances. And as they investigate that and pull the threads at it, they reveal what turns out to be a gigantic international conspiracy that has its roots in the Vietnam War, and have to take on these villainous drug smugglers who have a high-level military background. So that's a pretty unwieldy distillation of the.
Well, if you're listening to this, you've probably seen Lethal Weapon.
But yeah, right. But like just trying to wrestle it into some sort of shape. But it's often quite illuminating to try and work out what the premise is, because it's not one that you can really. It isn't high concept.
No,
it's character driven.
It's one of the things I love about these movies.
The plot is quite elaborate.
Yeah, it's not like Die Hard in Los Angeles. It's like it's just
terrorists take over a skyscraper. One guy has to fight back.
It's
that's very simple.
One of the reasons I love these movies is they don't have a distillation. They're character driven. They're about people. I've always loved these movies the most. This is probably my favorite film franchise because of the way the characters relate to each other.
So, with that in mind, in your opinion, let's start with with that premise, such as it is. It's not really. It's just a story. It's not really. You can't. It's hard to break it down into a premise. But what makes this so unique from a story standpoint?
Well, okay.
Or is it unique? Or is it how it's presented?
I think it's. There's a lot.
What makes it so special?
There's a lot of things that I want to. Then I want to get your insight on this.
Go ahead.
But so I would say that 48 Hours is rocks, right? And it is kind of about. It's about the relationship between these 2 guys. But I think that this, to me, the genre has evolved over the 5 years to the point where this might be the sort of what's the word? The platonic ideal of this kind of movie. It's exciting, it's engaging, it's entertaining, it's also substantial. And I think crucially, these movies are pretty progressive despite being about cops, and especially the first 2, really anti-racist movies, which is really interesting to think about. One of the things that I love about this movie, and I don't think that this is necessarily thought out before, I think it just happened, is that this movie is about a burnout redeemed not by love, but by meeting a family and becoming a part of that family. And I've always found that very moving. And the fact that they are a black family of affluence is not central to the idea of it, right? It could be a white family, right? But the choice to cast Danny Glover, Danny Glover's just it's just Danny Glover. The combination of Danny Glover, Darlene Love, and those 3 kids is just so moving.
It's a place you want to hang out, isn't it?
The scene at the beginning when the eggs are on the floor and the kids are coming in, and he takes the bacon from the girl. It's that's my bacon. Yeah, it is, right? And so to me, and then I have all these notes, but one thing that really intrigues me, one thing that I've always noticed about this movie. The first time you see Riggs, he's on his day bed thing, or no, he's on his bed with a cigarette in his mouth.
Yeah,
right?
He's waking up with a cigarette in his mouth.
He partners with Riggs. They go to his house, right? Riggs goes to Murtaugh's house and has dinner and has that amazing, I do it real good, when he talks about killing. But then crucially, that night, Murtaugh stays up late watching the Amanda Hunsaker video, right?
Mm-hmm.
The next morning, he's awoken by Riggs, well-dressed, shaved, ready to start his day and be a detective. And that's always stood out to me, that, like, Riggs maybe went home and was like, maybe things aren't so hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
It's always stood out to me that he's like, let's do this. Like, there's like a transformation that happens on like day 3 of their partnership.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the fact that Riggs earlier in the film saves Murtaugh's life at the pool when the guy pulls the gun out. So he's like, it's not actually by the end that Riggs is a killer. It's that he saves people. He saves the Murtaughs.
And he
saves Rianne.
In the excise school scene, he's also saves a lot of people.
But I think it's crucial that the people he mostly saves in this movie are the Murtaughs.
Right.
He saves Roger early in the movie. Yeah. He saves the daughter. He has the fight on the lawn. And so he's no longer defined just by being a killer. He's defined by, saving someone. And
he's defending people that he's come to love.
That he cares about, right? And he sees this family and he Rianne has this, I love the scene when they're at the table and she's like staring at him and the kids are doing the beatboxing with their
little rap.
Yeah, and it's just like so warm and like Darlene Love is just this like matriarchal figure. And I find that like the redemption arc in this story really great because I think a lot of people understandably focus on like Riggs as this mythic hero. There's that great line that the general has when he goes like, there are no heroes left in the world, and Riggs kicks in the door. But it ultimately, to me, is about saving people he loves rather than just being a killer. And the kind of like idea that like all heroes are killers. Yes, but like, at least in the context of this movie. But I think that is the first thing, is that it's about redemption through saving lives. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to the heroes in a second, but just talking a little bit more about this from a plot standpoint. Because we'll dig into the heroes big time in a moment, and everything you're saying is really, really interesting about the mythic nature of it. But I think it's worth talking about the plot and where it's laid out, as separate from the characters for a second, because I think what struck me about this film on this viewing was most of these films that I spend a lot of time and I write stuff that's in this genre, crime thrillers, noir, this type of stuff, right? Or detective procedurals or some combination of that, right? Typically, on a note you will get is a noir. So think of Chinatown, right? It's probably the classic example.
I would love to think about Chinatown.
I know you do. It's very localized, right?
Yes.
The conspiracy is very localized.
Yeah.
And there's something weirdly, it's a bit counterintuitive, but the more localized and specific it is, the more universal it can be in a weird way. Chinatown is very much about Los Angeles and water and Mulholland, essentially. I mean, it's not called that, but it's all of that type of world.
Yes.
And that still speaks to bigger issues. But what this film does that's very different is that the case that they're working on, which you're barely even probably following, which is often the case with like some of Shane Black's plotting is almost intentionally impenetrable. But this is particularly true in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. You kind of almost can't follow the plot.
I love that movie.
Right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's much more about the characters than it is about the plot. I bet if I put a gun to your head, you can tell me the plot of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
I have no memory of it at all.
You just don't remember.
Nice Guys is similar in that way.
Nice Guys is similar. It's a little bit clearer what's going on in it, but sometimes it's relatively obtuse. You can sort of, okay, this girl jumped off, and we're going to check out this lead and the pimp, and we're going to go to this thing and blah blah blah. You're not really like paying attention. You just love the repartee. But what I love about this film, that I can't think of another film that has done this. I'm sure I could stand to be corrected. But basically, it's a localized, LA-based police investigation. And as they peel the onion of it, they realize, holy shit, this is like global stakes, and the roots of the conspiracy trace all the way back to the Vietnam War and real history of the Air America CIA operations that were going on. And American Gangster touches on this a little bit as well, right? This type of thing. And also a movie I think we should just touch on for a second, Air America.
Air America, right.
Which is kind of like a weird prequel to Lethal Weapon in an odd way.
Made after, but
made
takes place
after,
before, yeah.
Made in. So if you're not familiar with Air America, which was a Roger Spottiswoode directed movie from 1990, in which Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. play pilots Wild.
Yeah, but then they became lifelong friends.
They became friends, yeah. And they play pilots for this CIA program in Laos that is not supposed to exist, that is tangential to the Vietnam War, but is trying to achieve certain American objectives. And basically, they're flying. Sometimes it's like arms, or sometimes it's like livestock, or whatever it might be. But what's also going on under the table is a bunch of opportunists from the CIA are taking advantage of like the opium trade to fly heroin out of Southeast Asia.
War profiteering.
So it's really, really interesting because it's also kind of a buddy movie. It's a movie that I really enjoy. I don't think it works. It's going for a MASH type war's absurd tone, but you're dealing with very serious issues, drug smuggling, and like in some cases like genocide, and really, really awful stuff. And it has this kind of like wacky tone where it's trying to say, like, let's not be so serious about a very serious subject, and it doesn't quite.
That's a hard balance.
It's a very difficult thing to pull off.
There's only a few things that Three Kings kind of pulls it off.
Sure, yeah. It's a tough tone to get. I mean, maybe Kelly's Heroes, or so, there's it can be done. It doesn't quite work in this instance, but it's just so interesting that this movie. My point is, this movie that seems almost like a Chinatown type localized mystery ends up like becoming this gigantic international conspiracy with global stakes, and I think that is something that's actually makes this really special and unique and fresh.
I had not thought of that, and weirdly, I think one of the reasons I hadn't thought about it is that despite that being true, it all feels very concrete and on the ground. Like, the way that it hints at that is like one of my favorite moments, like goosebumps moments in this movie, is when they go to Dixie's house and Dixie's house blows up. And then they're talking to the kids. And Murtaugh is, well, one of my favorite
funny scene.
We're going to put an APB out on Big Bird. But the little boy they're talking to him, and he says, it was paint. And Murtaugh's like a tattoo? And he points at Riggs's arm. And then Riggs turns to Murtaugh and goes, Roger, that's a Special Forces tattoo. And you're like, it's such a it's just so well executed in every way. And it does enough for you to go like, this is much bigger than what we thought. It also has, the moment when Joshua takes out, what's the guy's name?
Michael Hunsaker.
And then Riggs empties 3 clips to. Oh my god! Like that's Philly special.
It's true. It's a difficult balance to pull off of a film that kind of becomes almost like that could be a plot from a James Bond or Jason Bourne type level, massive international conspiracies, ex-CIA, really, really well-armed bad guys, and going into urban environments with that level of like artillery and hardware. But it never feels not somehow realistic.
Yes.
For the most part. I mean, I will say it's not realistic that a police officer could be like, no, dude, just let them fight. Like, they're going to fight. They're going to kill each other. They're going to fight to the death. I take full responsibility. Like, sorry, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. No, totally.
but so there are moments like that strain credulity if you wanted to, be that guy. But I think for the most part, who wants to be that guy? It's what the audience craves in that moment, and that's more important than like being slavish to realism. But I do think just from the plot and premise standpoint, that is something really special.
Well, and that feeds into my other theory about this movie. Well, that is well documented, is that this is the great fusion of a late 80s action movie and a 70s coming home Vietnam movie, right? So, like, on the one, like, I want to get your thoughts about this later on, but I have a question about Shane Black.
Cook on this. I love it.
So, like, earlier this year, I rewatched the Vietnam movie. Oh God, of course I can't forget the name. The guy has the hook.
Oh, Rolling Thunder.
I watched Rolling Thunder again.
Great movie.
And I love Rolling Thunder. I think it's a phenomenal movie. It's very sad, but it feels to me like a bit of a precursor to this movie, in that this guy comes home. His wife has had an affair. It's like I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it.
Played by William Devane.
William Devane, who's just so
awesome,
fucking good in that movie, and like he has to get revenge on these guys who come into his house, and he calls Tommy Lee Jones, and he shows up at Tommy Lee Jones's house, and Tommy Lee Jones is like,
let's clean him up.
And they go, and there's this like really exciting but also deeply tragic scene. But like we have to keep in mind a couple things. This is 1987. We're only 6 years after Apocalypse Now. We're a couple years after Platoon. Like Vietnam was still in the air in the 80s. My dad talked about Vietnam all the time. My dad did not serve in Vietnam. My dad was in South Korea during the war. But like my dad was a veteran. And he was I think I said this on the podcast, but my dad used to call Robert McNamara's house. And like so like the sort of stain of Vietnam was something that I think I was sort of like exposed to a lot. And from a very young age, I was told like this war is wrong. It was wrong that it happened. And what it also did to a lot of these guys coming home was really, really tragic. So that was like present. And so I think what's really powerful about Lethal Weapon is that it's like steeped in Vietnam. Every major character in this movie is a Vietnam veteran.
That's right.
It also makes a lot of sense that a certain amount of Vietnam veterans would come back and become police officers because it's just like a natural place for them to end up. And everyone's life has been made somewhat tragic by this, right? Like Riggs is married, but like he's a killer. He has that amazing monologue about doing the guy in Laos, right? Laos. Roger is a veteran, whereas Riggs cannot live outside of his service. Murtaugh has made this effort to like become a family man, have kids, right? And the movie finds these really smart ways to bring this out of Murtaugh. One moment that I think is really interesting is when he's in the bathtub at the beginning of the movie, the family surprises him. The way he reacts is not like, it's my family. He's scared out of his mind for a few seconds. So I think there's the implication that he has PTSD. He's also a good shot. You know, he takes out the general earlier in the movie. Like, he knows how to handle himself. He, as we talked about in our 48 Hours episode, he can kind of be a dick, right? But it's like, he's kind of, I think, pushed this stuff down. Whereas Riggs just lives in the miasma of it. There's the great walk and talk in the police station parking lot. When he goes, I pulled your file. It says here you served in Vietnam or whatever. And then there's a moment of silence. And Glover goes, it's over, you know. And Gibson goes, yes, it is. And what I like about that moment is that, like, it's not over for Riggs. None of it's over. But Glover has kind of like, I have a normal life and a normal family. And he has to embrace his inner killer at the end of the movie.
It's whether you can turn it off so Murtaugh's learned how to turn it off.
Yeah.
And adapt, right? And Riggs can't turn it off.
Right.
Right? He's still in that zone. But the irony is the story ultimately requires him to keep it on and actually put his foot on the pedal, and get back to being that guy that was this kind of ruthless killer, because that's what the situation requires. So it's I can't think of too many other films by this, as you said, like Platoon was the year before, so it's still very much in the minds of the American psyche, but I can't think of too many other mainstream sort of pop studio cop movies that we're still talking about Vietnam.
Right.
I think it was like there were movies like Platoon, and also in the same year you had like Hamburger Hill, and then there was
Hamburger Hill,
Casualties of War at the end of the decade.
That movie's brutal.
Which is a really grueling experience.
Well, that's a big De Palma thing, is he's interested in this stuff.
In war crimes and things like that. But I can't think, most of the other movies that we're going to do, I don't think touch on Vietnam at all. So it is unusual, and it makes this a bit of an outlier that that stuff is in the ether. And like you said, that Michael, it's still there. Like Michael Hunsaker pulls him back. The reason he pulls Roger back into the case is because it's like, you owe me.
He took
for things that happened in the war, right?
It's all defined by that.
It looms over their lives in a really, really interesting way.
And I would say social concerns are really, like, one of the things that I've always stood out to me is that when they're sitting around the table in the Murtaugh kitchen, there's a giant end apartheid sticker on the wall. Like, These movies are not avoiding the reality of
That's
the
a Donner.
world when they're made.
That's a Dick Donner thing, and he puts that in a lot of his. You'll see little touches like that are social issues that he feels passionate about. He kind of peppers them in, and then in the sequel, of course, is explicitly about apartheid.
One of the great choices
and
of the second
South Africa, and he tackles these kind of issues. It's slightly less of the case in 3, although I guess you could say it is about like the gang violence and
I think
the rise of that.
the third one is gang violence in LA.
And then the fourth one is like illegal immigration, or not so much from the standpoint of like a right-wing standpoint about that issue, but actually like compassion,
empathy and compassion
to trafficking and issue, and things like that, because he was Dick Donner, a very progressive liberal.
I love Richard Donner. I love
incredible,
him. Yeah,
incredible guy. Also, he's a producer on this as well as a director.
So I want to talk to you about that, because in the last previously on 48 Hours of Buddy Movies, you made the point that like we're coming out of the sort of new Hollywood era of the 70s, when films are, you have Reds, you have these progressive, these longer winded. I hate to say that in a negative way because I love a lot of these movies, but like the 80s is the age when some of that sensibility fuses with a studio-driven, producer-driven world, right? And you've got Joel Silver, but I want to talk about how I haven't read a lot of Shane Black's original scripts.
They're amazing.
But I think Shane Black has a little bit of a foot in that 70s world, in that he like really leans into violence. He really leans into like the things that he's interested in, right? Like, doesn't a plane explode in one of the Lethal Weapon scripts coding LA and like cocaine?
That was the original ending of this script.
Right.
The cocaine, there was supposed to be an explosion in the sky, I guess a drug trafficking aircraft or something, and cocaine drops down like snow across the Hollywood sign.
Right. And famously, Riggs originally dies in the original Lethal Weapon 2 script. And Donner was like, bud, for a bunch of reasons. One, we're going to make more money if we do more of these. Can't blame him there. But two, I think Donner kind of like helped produce Black's script into this. Like, I'm curious if you think like Black's kind of an auteur with like a specific angle, but like he would have made bleaker movies without Donner at the helm.
So there's something I'll say this about this is like, okay, so Shane Black got successful very, very early. He was a recent UCLA grad. This is like, I think he wrote this in like 1985. The movie comes out in 87, and it's a giant hit, and he's basically set. He has a bump in his career, but he's basically been significant for a very long time.
Yeah,
and it's that's somewhat rare, although there are precedents in that era.
Esther House,
including
maybe.
Esther House. Yeah, I mean they were sort of contemporaries, but the guy I was thinking of, I forget his name. He wrote Highlander and he wrote Backdraft. Highlander was he was also a UCLA guy.
Right. This is the age of the script. Well, I'll say that from my point. While you do that, my point of view on this age is that like in some ways, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but this might be the second great era to be a screenwriter in Hollywood if you're successful, because you're like people kind of people of a certain age kind of like found out about screenwriting because of guys like Shane Black, right? And the sale of the Last Boy Scout script, which was like $1.3 million or whatever it was. So like this is weirdly an era when I think writers were super valued and almost had a kind of credibility that often they don't get in this industry.
Well, yeah. So the guy's name was Gregory Wyden, by the way, who was also a great writer and also had a fire department background, which is why Backdraft is so great. So he was a contemporary of Shane Black. So this type of thing was happening where people were getting plucked at an early age. But what the point I was going to make was, I think as a young writer, and I can speak from my own experience, when you kind of don't have anything to lose, you're more fearless in your creative choices. And I think you can kind of have that, I don't give a fuck, I'm going to make it dark, I can make it nihilistic, I can do, whereas as you get a little older and you have other things to sort of think about, sometimes it can make you a bit more gun shy, and a bit more, you're a bit more risk averse to some extent. But I think one of the advantages of being a young writer, and this is why when someone really breaks young, like Tarantino, they have a kind of zero fucks, swagger to their style, right? Now, so I think Shane Black probably needed a little bit of, no, I don't want to say necessarily softening, but maybe polishing.
Well, I think development.
Development and polish from a seasoned studio guy like Dick Donner, who was always dialed in to like the audience's popcorn experience. And this was a guy who worked across multiple genres, right? Was able to do something like The Omen, was able to do the Superman, the greatest superhero movie ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I think in some ways the most important superhero movie ever made.
The most influential.
Yeah.
And he
created a tone for those movies.
He just understood audiences in a way that without compromising the vision. But this film, even though it's so dark thematically, it's so bright visually. Yeah. It's so sort of slick and shiny, So I think the combination of the two is beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful alchemy that occurs there. And then you've got Joel Silver sort of behind the scenes as well.
Another kind of auteur producer.
And it also had great instincts for what audiences wanted in this era, right? So I think all of that stuff is.
I wanted to say I don't think that
perfect combination of chemistry.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't think Richard Donner gets the credit he deserves, because I think he's like amazing, and I think he probably like one gift that a seasoned producer or director has is they can look at a script like this and go like, wow, this is incredible. Let's make these changes. Like he can sort of sculpt like the clay of someone's creativity and really like, and I would love to see Shane Black's original version of this. I think it'd be fun to watch, but I think that like Donner made it palatable for a mainstream
audience. It probably
audience.
wouldn't be. This is a Warner Brothers movie. It would probably. There's a fine line between like, and Warner Brothers did. Warner Brothers aren't averse to in this era to doing schlock. They did Steven Seagal's all of his movies for like the first 5 or 6 movies. They're not averse to doing like
another journeyman
action
director.
junk.
Yeah,
that this could have eased. I'm not saying it wouldn't be that because Shane Black is a great writer, but there's a version of it that could just be like that kind of some of the Steven Seagal stuff in particular, like Out for Justice it's so nasty and nihilistic.
It's mean. It's mean spirited.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is like about a mean world, but it has a big warm heart, and I think that's what Donner really brings. Helps like bring out.
He brings it to the brink.
Because if you think about Last Boy Scout, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, I wouldn't say that's a particularly warm movie. It's pretty bleak.
It feels like that's probably the movie that Shane Black got his way the most with, maybe.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation. That's a whole other conversation about all the cooks in the kitchen on that one. I miss
this era of like insane personalities making movies together, like the like just like all the push of like with that movie, the Tony Scotts and the Bruce Willis. Like I mean, we've talked about it before.
I mean, the story of making Last Boy Scout is
there a book about it?
There should be. Yeah, I've read a lot about it, and I read Black's original script, and it's incredibly bleak.
If only there was a writer in this room.
Even bleaker than the movie, which similarly I think is so dark, but because of Tony Scott's flashy, shiny visual style, the two things kind of balance out. So you can do dark stories, but if you don't have the right like filmmaker, they just become mean and nihilistic and just
they're more in
make
line
you
with
feel
the
shitty.
70s than maybe the 80s.
Exactly.
Is kind of the point that I wanted to get back to.
Exactly. But let's move into the heroes and talk a little bit more about what makes these guys individually and together so spectacular.
Let's do it.
What are your sort of top line thoughts on? I wonder, how much of this is the writing and how much of it is just that lightning in a bottle of the perfect casting chemistry?
Well, the story goes that Donner screen tested Gibson and Glover together, and at the end of it was like, I've never seen anything like this before. They just they got it, they improvised, they figured it out. Like, I will say, present history aside, I don't know, but you can feel the love between Gibson and Glover. Like, you can feel that they love each other, especially towards the end of the movie, and I just think that it is lightning in a bottle, obviously created and ultimately built on the backbone of an incredible script, right? I just think that there's this weird power. I think I'd start with Glover. I think Glover is in life a multifaceted, creative person. You know, he's obviously often compared to Sidney Poitier in that he's like, you know, an actor and an activist. And like, let's not forget that like he's making movies like, you know, with like really interesting filmmakers. And this is kind of like his foray into the studio. But like, he's well known, right? He's not like
Yeah, he'd done like Color Purple, Silverado, you know.
Yeah, and he's you know he's
Witness as well.
Oh, he's so good. And
Great
Witness
part
kind
in
of
that.
a heel turn in that movie. Yeah. But he brings this like whole other thing, this warmth to this character. He's like lovable. You experience, I think, a lot of the movie through his eyes. You know, like you meet, and so I've always just very kind of like moved by his warmth versus like Riggs's cynicism and coldness. And again, the idea that Riggs is redeemed by the way this family takes in this like puppy, you know, at the end, like this like lost, you know, character,
lost stray dog.
Yeah, exactly. Who and you know, I like him.
It might bite you, but it's basically good.
Yeah, and
just
you
needs
know,
a little bit of love.
It's hard to talk about their relationship without talking about the second movie, but it's really personified in the scene in the second movie when he's talking to Trish about the night Vicky dies, and it's some of the best acting ever. I mean, I know we'll cover the second movie, but Gibson in that scene when he's giving that monologue talking about the gold pen is like incredible, right? And this movie is the precursor to all of that. So I think it's that they both project, Glover projects like warmth and love, but also can be a hard ass. And you watch Gibson's performance go from this like nihilistic, fatalistic figure to like, but he's still kind of funny. Like he has this little bit of like humor when they get in the car and he's got the hot dog and he's like, I love this job. Like it's there, but by the end it's softened a little bit. His scene with Rianne, when she opens the door at the end and he like drops off the bullet, so weird. And it's like, I won't be needing it anymore. He's a different person. He's gone and paid his respects to Vicky. And I think you see this softening. I think Glover brings out a humanity in Gibson.
It's interesting as well because he's a real prick to him for the first sort of 20, 30 minutes as well, isn't he? He's really, really quite horrible to Riggs.
Yeah.
And there's that breakthrough moment where Riggs is sort of laughing and being, well, you're giving me nothing but kindness.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a great moment.
So far. And Murtaugh, I think, kind of realizes, I guess I have been really, really hard on this guy who's clearly quite fragile.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that Riggs says in that speech where he's like, you know why I don't kill myself is because of the job.
Yeah.
So there's still some sense. It's interesting that there isn't a set. He doesn't like just, I guess I just do this now, and I hate it, and because he's like, no, he actually does feel a genuine some sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Some desire to put his skills as sort of violent as they are sometimes. To good use, to save people or make a difference, or his version of social justice or whatever that might be. He does. I think that's really interesting because often the time it's like the cops are always like, I hate the job. Even John McClane's is sort of like, it's like a drag for him. It sounds like the way he talks about his life back in New York, and I've got all of these cases to deal with. He's not like that.
And crucially, when we see him in New York, he's hungover and just furious.
It's sort of like, this is what I'm built to do. I'm pretty good at it, so I'm going to do it. But it's not like I'm like skipping down the street to get to the station.
Well, and he comes alive in those movies when he's like Bruce Willis does when he's solving problems, right? Like or thinking through it. Like he's a great detective. I don't know if Gibson's character plays quite as that same level of detective. He's more just like a bruiser.
They're more gunslingers, aren't they? And just to talk about that for a second, because Black had said, this idea was, he saw it as having its lineage in westerns, and the idea of like the situation is so bad, these outlaws are so bad, that we have to pull the guy who is the most despised, spit on, reviled outsider gunslinger and bring him out, drag him back out, and go and say, look, we can't deal with this situation. These guys are too evil and vicious.
Right.
We hate you, but we need you to go and deal with it. And that was sort of on a fundamental level how he saw it. And he also referenced Dirty Harry as a character that was an inspiration, which is an interesting, significant figure, also a Warner Brothers kind of icon.
Shane Black would have been too young. No, he was way too young to have served in Vietnam. So that wouldn't. The reason I ask is because you have to wonder if there's a little
He's
bit.
in his 20s when he wrote this.
Yeah.
Right, mid-20s.
So yeah, I mean he's young still.
Yeah,
and he's been famous for so long. But you have to wonder if some of this again is that Vietnam influence, right? Things are so bad and the world is so bad and there's no heroes left in the world. You there's no room for Superman anymore. These guys need to be Batman. They need to be problematic. It's a little bit like what Nolan does with Batman in the Dark Knight movies, right? It's which is debated a lot, is I'm going to surveil everyone's phone to find the bad guy, right? I'm going to shoot to kill. That's a big, by the pool when he blows that guy away, or and it's also that he's a loose cannon a little bit. When he in Lethal Weapon 2, when he dives and knocks the guy out the window to stop him from killing, he doesn't give a fuck, right? It's similar to maybe a screenwriter writing a script being I've got nothing to lose. Riggs is powerful because he has nothing to lose a little bit, right? So that's a really interesting element, and Glover does. And what feels interesting is by the end of the movie, he's well, maybe I do have something to lose. This partner, this family of his that I care about, that whole element of it.
Yeah. Shall we talk about the villains?
Let's talk about the villains.
Piece? We talked, and you brought this up in the 48 Hours episode but I think this is more specifically achieved here, of how Black kind of invents this paradigm of the henchman, who is not the mastermind, being the primary villain, the primary sort of antagonistic force. And there's it's writ large here with the character of Mr. Joshua.
You're just knocking photos off the walls, right?
By Gary Busey, who is far more memorable. With no disrespect to the character of General McAllister.
McAllister's kind of a functionary.
But it's Busey who you remember. It's vivid.
He's great in this movie.
What are your thoughts on the villains of this piece, the two of them?
I mean, I think they're really, really strong. I think one thing this movie does, per our buddy Isaac Butler, is really good doubling.
Yeah.
Right? So, Riggs kind of doubles for Joshua, right?
Right.
Yeah, he really does. They're both these kind of, shell-shocked guys who are,
both
killers.
Special Forces.
Both Special Forces. We're introduced to Joshua with him burning his arm with the lighter, right? And it's oh, you go hard, I go harder, right? And I've always found it really... I mean... This is one of Busey's most disciplined performances. You get a lot less of the Gary Busey of it all, right?
Yeah.
You kind of forget in a way that you're watching Gary Busey. Side note, my sister-in-law's friend is named Joshua after this character.
Wow.
Yeah, wild, right? But
cool.
I know, it's really cool. But I remember when we were having a son, I was maybe we should name him Martin. No, but he's just so disciplined, and if we're going to look at the Vietnam analogy, these guys are not out of Vietnam. They're still bringing in heroin, right? So it's he can't escape the war in the same way that Riggs can't escape the war. Now he's not given he's not a real character, right? He's not. What I mean when I say that is we're not empathetic to him, right?
He's not dimensional. We don't know anything about him. We don't need to.
But Busey does a great job of imbuing him with this soldier's power, right? He's a disciplined soldier. He's under a general, but they're mercenaries, and that's key, I think, also to this movie is that Vietnam kind of in the cultural imagination, whether this is true or not, kind of invents the idea of the mercenary for hire in a Hollywood sense, right? Because Vietnam was such, in a way that World War II was not, or World War I, is a complicated war, right? It's so privatized. It was such a privatized event that the kind of merc for hire, no discipline, or no allegiance is really kind of a big part of this movie, right? And it's, think what you want about law enforcement. Riggs is kind of bound to the state by being a police officer. There's There's a state apparatus, in theory, looking down on you, telling you what you can and can't do. You have a code of conduct. Mercenaries do not have that. So they
have all the skills.
They have all the skills.
Hardware and transportation.
They have money. They have this money.
But no moral code or boundaries or tether.
Right. And I think that they're kind of mirror versions of each other because Joshua goes down this path to privatized military, and Riggs goes becomes home and becomes.
And you could imagine that McAllister might be someone that was in the same, would walk the same corridors as Hunsaker and Murtaugh.
Yes.
Right, to some extent, right? Like he's maybe a little older, but I'd have to research the actors' ages. But essentially, it's not like a perfect doubling. I think the doubling is definitely much more acute with Joshua and Riggs and the tattoo connection and everything, right?
Yeah.
But broadly, yes, I think that it's cool that this is similar to 48 Hours. It's like there's two bad guys and two good guys in quotes, right? And that dynamic is, it's really effective. But it's Joshua who's the main bad guy. Murtaugh kills McAllister in the alley the movie's got like 20 minutes to go.
Yeah.
He just takes him out, and then it becomes the final mano-a-mano showdown on the Murtaugh's lawn.
Right, and the Vietnam there's two more points I want to make about the Vietnam thing that I think relate to the character. The casting of Al Leong as the torturer is very Vietnam coded because of the history of POWs in Vietnam. And POWs, this was like a big political, cultural issue in the United States in the 80s and 90s. It was like this ill-founded theory that there were still prisoners over there. Rambo 2 is built on the blood of this.
Three Chuck Norris movies about it missing in action.
And if you dig into them, the politics of that were really sketchy. It was a big platform for like a lot of these guys. But like in theory, they were saying there's a lot of these POWs. There's no evidence that was true, but it was in the culture, right? And so the choice to make Riggs' torturer be an Asian man, I think Al Leong is Chinese, right? So it's not a direct corollary, but like they're going for that idea of Riggs as being tortured, in this like horrible way. So I want to bring that point up. But then that final fight, if we're thinking about the Vietnam of it all, it's the fight between the man with no code of conduct and the man who has a code of conduct, which is Riggs. And in this, Shane Black, the hero, has to get down in the dirt kind of, a philosophical idea of these movies. The fact that, and I think this is interesting, so Riggs and Murtaugh both shoot Joshua.
Yes,
I think it's
very
just
important.
But I think it should just be Murtaugh because I think there's that scene before that where Riggs is like, "We have to get dirty with this."
Yeah,
rig.
We're gonna have to get bloody on this one, Raj.
I am a progressive
the way
person.
He says his voice, the tenor of his voice.
It's so it's so morally repugnant in a way, but it's like so fucking powerful. Mel Gibson, it's an all-timer performance. Like he's so built, he's so keyed into this. But yeah, I've always felt that it might be more powerful I've always wondered if there's an ending of this where Joshua almost gets the edge and Murtaugh has to take him out. I've always wondered if that would be an interesting way for this to end. I don't think it should, but I love the image of them taking him out together, but I've always wondered if it'd be more powerful if it was just Murtaugh taking him out with his 6-shooter, which Riggs makes fun of earlier in the movie.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because those, we just talked about the Jackal, on Die Hard on a Blank, that also does something similar because it ends up being, spoiler for the Jackal.
Yeah.
It ends
but
up
also,
being,
what are you doing?
Why haven't you watched it 5 times?
Yeah, well,
it ends up being Isabella who shoots the Jackal, but then he comes, a la Carl, he comes back to life, and Richard Gere, the hero, the ostensible hero, is the one who kind of ultimately finishes him off. The audience, I crave and feel unsatisfied if I think it was absolutely the right thing to do for the audience experience of the movie, is to have the two of them synchronized, vanquishing the evil force that has threatened and destroyed.
It makes sense from a story perspective. I've always just wondered if what it would do to Murtaugh's arc,
right?
Because if you think of it as the character who changes the most over the course of it, that Riggs is the main character, right? But Murtaugh kind of comes alive over the course of the movie. So
it's worth saying that this movie resurrected Gary Busey's career, and he actually auditioned for it, which he had never had to do because he was actually, I believe, an Academy Award nominated actor.
Yeah, for the Jerry Lee Lewis movie.
The Buddy Holly thing.
Buddy Holly, excuse me, not Jerry Lee Lewis. That's Dennis Quaid.
And you're right that he was quite kind of disciplined and restrained in his performance. He goes on to become much more wild in his performances, sometimes to
We're going to get the captain
sometimes to tremendous effect.
Yeah.
Often to tremendous effect. And, I think like a movie like Point Break,
oh man,
is an exceptional performance.
Yeah, he's really good in that.
Worth kind of talking about. Let's talk about the action. As an action movie, how does this perform?
I think that this is the pinnacle of action movie. This and Die Hard. They're very different. Die Hard is a sustained action film for its 2-hour running time, right? The action very rarely lets up. When it does, it's great. But like, because of the this is going to be a very Phil Lee moment, because of the Aristotelian choices made in Die Hard to be like one location, one period, one basically real-time event. Everything is a pressure cooker, right? That whole movie is it maybe invents the action movie pressure cooker. I mean, of course, there's other prequels to that. But like, what I love about Lethal Weapon is you have short, sustained action, character scenes. Short, sustained action, character scenes. Like 48 Hours. I like a brief 1-minute action scene. I love when they show up at Dixie's apartment and it explodes. And Riggs uses a homophobic slur. I hate that moment of that. But like, it's there in the movie.
Same line as in Last Boy Scout, actually.
Yeah, totally.
It's kind of weird.
It's a time thing, I think. But until the ending, when it's this like sustained, incredible action scene, it does it for me. When I was younger, my dad used to describe the difference between like action movie violence and personal violence, like when violence gets personal in movies and how disturbing it was.
Right.
And I think this movie is really a great like action picture until the final 20 minutes when the violence becomes very personal. And certainly, as we've said, like the idea that like a cop is going to like, no, let them fight on the lawn. No, but like it's so powerful and that fight is so good. And it looks like it's Busey and Gibson doing the entire thing. I just think that it really works for me. Every action sequence is good. Tremendous, really. And I do want to throw a special shout out to the brief but amazing Christmas tree shootout at the beginning of the movie because it's funny. Those three guys are like Joel Silver Hall of Fame, just got dudes in a movie. Like when he's counting out the $100 bills, it's so good. And it has a little bit of the Three Stooges energy that's going to come later in the other movies. And it's also just like so tight and so contained. And like for me, that's like what action movies are. It's like a cat and mouse chase that's quick and powerful. And I love a sustained action sequence, but the brevity and brutality of these scenes until the ending when it becomes symphonic really do it for me.
I'll say, of course, what my favorite, you can probably guess what my favorite
I think it's
sequence
maybe mine too.
is the Philly special in the Mojave Desert with the helicopter stuff.
Yeah.
And that stuff is like, whoa. Imagine if you'd been seeing this movie for the first time in 1987 and you were just, this is like a cop movie set in LA.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, no, this is fucking epic. You know,
I just
scale of
goosebumps. The shot that begins that when the station wagon stops and Gibson gets out and just starts running.
Oh, it's so cool.
You're like, it's like a...
Well, they're going back to war,
yeah,
right? That's what's so kind of cool. I mean, it's like a different aesthetic environment.
Yeah.
It's a desert conflict instead of jungle
You know where
conflict.
they shot that? Victorville.
Right. Yeah, I think they say that, yeah.
Close to where they shot Face Off's airport sequence. The Face Off airport is the same as the airport in Tenet. They all are shot in the Victorville airport. So I feel like we need to drive out there and like pay our respects to these various...
I have a story about that when we do Black Hawk Down.
I wouldn't be shocked if Con Air had some Victorville in it as well. Yeah, you're totally right. I actually thought my favorite, besides the Christmas tree, is the very short killing of Huntsacker and Riggs just unloading.
And again, it's just so shocking that must have been to we're kind of used to it now, but like if that you're just watching the movie, they're having a conversation, it's so brilliantly directed and written because you're just like, okay, this is a expositional scene, right?
Yeah.
And it's a character, right? They're talking about, just kill him, Rod, just kill him.
Right.
And it's really powerful. But then all of a sudden, just like woo, out of nowhere, the helicopter arrives, and it's like he's like a dead shot from a helicopter. Very difficult skill.
Yeah,
he shoots him through the eggnog, and you're like, "Holy shit!"
It's amazing. It's
brilliant.
Well, and I also just think that like Last Boy Scout, like there's enough detective stuff in this movie to kind of like, even though it doesn't make that, it's like if you stop and think about it, you're like, wait, what is happening here? But like, they kind of go from place to place to place, and then it knows when to kick into high gear, and Donner knows how much of it to give to you, and he keeps it grounded. Like Riggs chasing that guy on foot down the highway is just like, it all feels very real. It also, I was watching it with my wife, or it was on, and she was like, wait, rewind that. And we rewound it, and like when Joshua runs out of the club, what's across the street? Musso and Frank's.
I was going to talk to you about this bit.
And it's just like, that's LA.
But that bit does always kind of throw me off because I always have the feeling that I'm like, oh, they're in some like they're still in the desert somewhere.
Oh, okay.
You know, there's just some kind of like janky old building or something.
Oh, interesting.
And then it always throws me off. No, they're on fucking Hollywood Boulevard. Like they're doing all this nefarious shit like right there in the center of LA.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
with some shitty band playing. You know, in the background. It always
Shades of Roadhouse.
It was yeah. Like, imagine they just brushed past Dalton.
You know, I didn't come to LA really until I was like in my 30s. I'd been here once or twice, but like, so like my youth around LA was defined by this. It was defined by Die Hard. It was defined by Speed. And so like, I've always been like, every time someone starts a car in LA, I'm like, is it going to explode? Like, it's really mythic as a result of that. And then you live here and you're kind of like,
these films kind of defined how the city was perceived in the culture for an entire generation, especially at this time of year, Christmas, which is this unique and timeless experience.
Love it here at Christmas.
It's great.
I love it.
Great.
I can't believe I'm leaving this year.
Let's just wrap up the anatomy of an action movie with our final section about the humor. What are your favorite like funny moments? And there's many of them, of course.
Okay, so
do you have a favorite like just quip line?
It's goddamn Christmas.
Why is that so? You always quote that. What is it about that is like tickles you so much?
I don't know. I think it's that it gives Busey a moment. A moment to like have not just be the like little sidekick to the main guy. But I also think that like I love melancholic Christmas movies. Because I have a lot of issues with Christmas. I don't like love Christmas. I love seeing my family. I love the like cozy feeling, but like there's elements of Christmas that like make me depressed. Like I think that's like normal. And I think that in the 80s there was like a great acknowledgement of that, like Gremlins, right? Like we're post It's a Wonderful Life, and I like the idea. There's something very Black-esque in this that like one of the most famous Christmas movies is on the TV and Busey shoots it. I just think it's very funny and very
the
silly.
Charlie Brown Christmas thing has all of that because he's like depressed about the consumerism of Christmas and stuff. So I guess it is sort of part of the it's all part of it.
I mean, it's also a bleak joke, but it's very, very funny. The moment, there's some really funny little moments. The APB on Big Bird's really funny. I think another one that's really funny is when they're at the shooting range.
Oh, yeah. What a scene.
It's so good. Glover, okay, yeah. I'm sure you love this too. I love watching detectives like, okay, let's talk through this whole thing. Let's figure it out.
It's another one of these staples that the shooting range. It's not in 48 hours, but you'll see it in many of these movies.
It happens in Lethal Weapon 3 too.
RoboCop as well, being like an iconic one that we'll talk about.
Do you like RoboCop?
It's okay.
That's okay.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine.
I like
RoboCop 3, but it's fine. And there's that great line where Riggs does the smiley face.
Yeah.
No, he shows Roger his sheet, whatever that thing is called. And Roger goes, "When do you sleep with that thing under the pillow?" And Gibson says, "What if I slept?" Like I think that's really funny. Yeah, the jumper scene is really funny. The do you really want to jump? But again, it's all tinged with melancholy.
It's all tinged with darkness.
Yeah, totally. This is probably the least funny Lethal Weapon movie.
Yes.
Lethal Weapon 2 probably being the second least funny, but Lethal Weapon 2 is funny. 3 and 4 almost become comedies,
Yeah.
Which I have issues with, but I like them.
Yeah.
But they don't also cheap out on the darkness, I think, either of those movies.
And I think, again, this is similar to the 48 Hours template, that it is an action thriller first, and it's just the chemistry of the actors makes it funny. And the chemistry and the scenarios, there's dark humor that comes out of it. Sinister, macabre humor.
Gibson has an adaptability as an actor. He can be in like very self-serious movies like The Patriot, which is a movie I enjoy, but is, doesn't have a laugh within
racist against Brits.
Well, doesn't have a laugh. Jason Isaacs is so evil. It doesn't have a laugh within 50 miles of it, right?
Ungrateful colonials.
Okay, chill out. But then he does like Bird on a Wire. Yeah, we are ungrateful. But then he does like Bird on a Wire, and he's very funny in that. Like, it's just, yeah, I don't know. Mel Gibson. My problematic fave. Also, kind of going to be a huge figure in this podcast because of these 4 movies, but also Dragged Across Concrete, which is like an art film cop movie that we're going to discuss.
I'm so excited
way
to
down the line.
talk about that.
I have such complicated feelings about that movie, but I think
I love that movie.
I understand loving it, and I also understand being like horrified by it.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
It's a complex movie to discuss.
It's also a bit intentionally provocative.
Oh yeah,
that movie wants to provoke. That scene
for
with
sure.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to it.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our final section of the show, the 48 Hours Oscars.
Oh yes, let's put on our flannel shirts.
Yes. I don't know. All right. Speaking of clothing, the Nolte's Scarf Award for Best Fit.
So for me for a second, because I have pictures.
If you're unfamiliar with this is award because of in 48 Hours, Nick Nolte's girlfriend, played by Annette O'Toole, gives him this maroon scarf that just tops off his look as he struts out onto the streets of San Francisco. So in honor of that look, we are giving the Nolte Scarf Award for Best Fit, male or female.
Damn it! I took pictures of this while I was watching.
It's an audio podcast.
I know, but I want to show you. So you, okay, I got him. Oh,
good. Okay, all right.
All right, I'm gonna show you what I think is the best fit in this movie, and I want you to describe it. It's Mel Gibson's fit.
All right, so this is your choice. Okay, so this is wow. Let me, if I may.
Yes.
So this is Mel Gibson with a kind of it's sort of like he's got a nice royal blue shirt, a kind of sandy
short coat
jacket, and those sort of like what would they call it, like Foster Wallace type,
bomber
tinted
the glasses.
Sunglasses that take up half your face.
Incredible.
Think Yaphet Kotto in Midnight Run.
Amazing.
Right? Like that kind of deal.
And you can't see in the photo, but he's wearing jeans and cowboy boots.
Yeah, it's a look. It's a strong
Gibson's
look.
fits in this movie, especially in the second half when he dresses a little better, are incredible. But we also have to give Danny Glover credit for the vests and ties.
Absolutely. 2 banger outfits.
Oh my God.
The aquamarine sweater vest, big fan.
Oh, that's incredible.
Big fan. And the light brown sweater vest.
Oh my God.
And very, very, very natty. I also want to give a shout out to Gary Busey's white sweater.
Yeah.
That he's rocking in the helicopter attack. He looks
really preppy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like he's going to a polo match.
Homicidal prep.
Immediately after assassinating Michael Hunsaker, he's off to the country club.
General McAllister's leather jacket is a good look.
Okay. But what's the winner?
The winner for me is the Gibson.
Is Riggs.
Is Riggs at the and also I like Riggs' trucker hat in the precinct. I really like the trucker hat.
Right, when he comes in kind of nondescript. I'd go for Roger's aquamarine sweater vest. I like the Miami Dolphins aspect.
I'm going to get those Riggs sunglasses.
Yeah, I used to have a pair. I think they were my dad's. They looked cool.
Oh,
circa
hell yeah,
1988.
they did, brother.
The Reggie Hammond Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film, excluding the leads.
That's tough.
Tough one. I only had 2 kind of
Let me hear him.
picks, which were Tom Atkins as Michael Hunsaker. Just kill him. Kill him.
He's good.
John Carpenter staple. We love.
He does
Tom.
a lot of signings in Burbank. I'd always love to go to him and be like, "Hey, I like you from John Carpenter, but Michael Hunsaker." See what he says.
Go and have some eggnog with him, and Gary Busey as Mr. Joshua. I mean,
I have a third nominee.
Go ahead.
Darlene Love.
Yes. Yep.
I love Darlene Love in this movie. I saw Darlene Love at the Thanksgiving parade a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I love...
Because she's a singer
That's
of
what she's known for. Yeah.
No, right?
Yeah.
And I think a songwriter.
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah. That's her big thing. I think it's a genius choice to cast her in this part. Another really funny moment is Roger, you're being an asshole.
Yeah.
I love
We all
her.
need to be told that by our wives.
Yeah, not me.
Now and
I'm
again,
fine.
just straighten us out.
I think Darlene Love. I also think I forget the actor Tracy Wolf plays
yes,
Rianne.
she's great.
She doesn't have much of a. She didn't do a lot outside of these movies, but
I had both of those in the Annette O'Toole Award for Best Female Performance with an Underwritten Character.
Okay, that's fair.
So, but we can talk about them here as well.
I think we should give it to Busey then.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The David Patrick Kelly Award for Most Valuable Weasel.
Oh, I know who this is.
I have two.
Let me hear him.
Edo Ross as Mendez. And Jimmy F. Skaggs as the drug dealer in the Christmas tree scene.
Oh,
the main
shit.
The main guy.
The guy who goes $100,000.
Yes.
So, oh boy, those guys.
That's a tough.
We need to do a whole podcast about that. I think we have to give it to Mendez.
Yeah.
Because I think the relief, it's like that scene is crucial to understanding how fucking serious these guys are. Like, this is not some like street hood. This is like, I'm going to burn my arm to show you that I will fucking kill you. And I think he's incredible in that moment as Mendez. I think that's my pick.
I'm a big fan of Edo Ross. He'll go on to play the main villain in Red Heat.
Yes.
Where he plays a Russian really, really well.
Good actor.
Or a Georgian. And also plays the commanding officer in Universal Soldier. So
wow.
He pops up.
The actor who plays, what's the name of the gentleman who plays the main drug dealer?
Jimmy F. Skaggs.
What else is, that's a great name.
I know.
Is he in Roadhouse? He should be.
He should be. Yeah, he does feel like he just walked right off that.
Forget it, you dumb shit.
Yeah.
What else is he in? Do you know?
I'd have to look it up.
Okay, that's fine. I just was curious. Those guys are so distinctive.
Skaggs cast?
Yes. I would love to be in on the casting of this movie where they're like, we need mullets, we need long hair, we need guys who look like they smoke 25 cigarettes a day. Like, just the process of casting this movie.
Well, Joel Silver just got all his homies. Let's have a quick look at the life and work of Jimmy F. Skaggs.
While you're doing that, I'm going to talk about another humorous moment. Shoot me when he headbutts that guy.
He's in the Blown Away video game.
Oh my God.
We need to get that immediately.
Is that on the 4K I just ordered?
Blown Away video game? How is that like okay?
That's the next.
Given the subject matter of that.
That's the next Patreon season of the show.
But was he in Roadhouse? It feels like he should have been. Our survey says.
I don't think so.
No, but he was in Spirit. He does not appear to have been in.
Okay.
Been in Roadhouse, but did quite a lot of work. The last award is the Best Gratuitous Nude Scene.
Oh, it's the first one. I hate this. Maybe it's
the
not.
last moments of Amanda Hunsaker.
That scene is so sad.
Yeah, it's a kind of a strong way to begin the movie.
I love that and then it fades into that Michael Kamen score.
Well, that could be nominated for the Roxanne Award for Best Musical Moment.
Oh, that's true.
Which I would. The Roxanne Award for Best Musical Moment. I'm contractually obligated to say.
Yeah, we live in a Twilight world. I get it. I think Paul Verhoeven. I think my pick is that because it's like that defines 80s sleaze to me.
Yeah.
Just in this way that like these movies felt dangerous.
Yeah.
I remember my mom being like, "What did you rent?" Like I just feel because my mom was like very concerned about sexism and like misogyny in these movies. She hated James Bond and like
mine too.
I just remember my mom being like, "Why are there naked women in all these movies?" Now you would, in a modern sense, you might be like, why is it cool to watch 45 people get shot to death in these movies instead of some boobs? But there was something sleazy about this. Movies were for adults.
I think that's right. But I do want to give a shout out to Amanda's porn film, The Big Bang, which I will say looked a little light on plot.
Yeah, no, it's an art film. Do you want to borrow my copy? I have one.
You've got it on 4K.
Yeah, I got it on 4K. I got it at the Kino Lorber did a 4K reissue
with a great commentary track.
Film historian.
All right, that does it for today.
That's the whole episode.
That's it. We're done. We're donezo. We should talk a little bit about. Let's just bring things back. Talk about what is going to be on 48 Hours in 2025.
Yeah.
Because we do need you guys to sign up.
Listen, you've gotten a lot for free already. So starting
2 years of content for free.
You sons of... we love you. In January, we are covering Beverly Hills Cop and excuse me, To Live and Die in LA.
Yeah.
Those are going to the first 2 episodes of this show are available on the Die Hard on a Blank feed and on the 48 Hours Patreon. That's patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies. You can start giving us money whenever you want. We'll take it. But starting in January, everything's going to be behind the paywall. We'll drop a little reminder.
Everything on 48 hours.
Everyone 48 hours behind the paywall.
Yeah.
Die Hard on a Blank is going to continue to be free. Forever and ever. But yes, all episodes of 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. I'm toying with 48 HBM is my abbreves for the name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Those are going to be on the patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddies Movies behind a paywall. $5 a month, $7 if you want a shout out when you subscribe. We're going to make 48 episodes.
And we're
going to
do beyond the first 2, which will be Beverly Hills Cop and To Live and Die in LA, as you said. We'll be doing movies like Running Scared,
Big Trouble
in Little China, RoboCop,
it's our first Verhoeven.
Yay! You
crazy.
Can't miss that. Now, come on.
Yeah,
Cough up, people.
I'm gonna watch that RoboDoc to prep for that one.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah,
I've watched it. It's fantastic.
I'm gonna watch that.
Highly recommend that. And then, please support us on the Patreon and get all of that. Get this wonderful content. There. Next time on Die Hard on a Blank, which will return to regularly scheduled programming in January, and that will be free. Will be our next episode is Hard Rain
with
special
guest
Chris Tapley,
our favorite cranky buddy,
our Graham Yost expert.
Yes,
and that will be followed by Deep Rising featuring Rob Hackett.
It's Die Hard and a Creature feature.
So 2 watery jet ski related
just soaking wet movies.
Rob, you may remember from our Terminal Velocity episode. He is a fantastic guest as well, and we had a great conversation with him.
Rob is so smart,
fantastic, and a real aficionado of like genre cinema,
right? And I will say that I found Deep Rising to be one of the most enjoyable first watches I've had in this. I actually was thinking the other day, like, I want to show that when they're a little older to my kids and be like, this is how nasty and gnarly like a big movie like this used to be. And it's just so great.
Fantastic stuff. So yeah, that's what we've got going on. Oh, we should also just mention, because we did touch on this in our Jackal episode, but the episode is now out, that we did with Blake Howard on his amazing new podcast, Minhunter, which is a scene-by-scene deep dive into Michael Mann's 1986 masterpiece, Manhunter.
You really cooked in that episode, man.
Episode, yeah, I mean...
I re-listened, I was like, holy shit, I should have talked less. Phil, like, kills this episode.
I was pumped to talk about that movie so much because it's so important to me. And I told a crazy story about how Michael Mann came to me in a dream, which is true.
Gold.
And what he said in the dream, which I wrote down, and I swear it's true. So I tell that story on the episode that's on, you can find that via One Heat Minute Productions.
Here is my pitch to you, listener. In early January, we're back in the, like, life has resumed, you know, but you need like a little relief, right? Do a double feature of Manhunter and To Live and Die in LA. Yes. And then do some primo William Peterson content talk. Because is there a greater 1-2 punch in the history of thriller movies, action cinema than William Peterson as Will Graham and then in To Live and Die in LA? It's, oh man, the fits in To Live and Die in LA.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I just want you guys to know that for that episode, I had an eBay bidding war for the 4K of that movie because I could have just bought it from the distributor, but
I can't wait. So please join us. Please join us for that. I guess the other thing to say to everybody is Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
We love you guys. Thank you for all of the support, the messages, the emails. I do have
one more thing. I'm so sorry.
Please, yeah.
Our first 2 patrons. We already have 2 patrons.
Wow, great. Okay.
A guy named Jamie, who
thank you, Jamie.
Wanted a shout out. And then our buddy Ryan, who emailed us earlier this year and found the Patreon without a queue and started giving us some dollars. You know? So those 2 guys get a shout out. We did have a third person, but they didn't pay for the shout out, so I'm not giving it to them.
But thank you regardless. Whatever your name is.
Should we read our nice email that we
Please, if we got one.
We got a nice
email. Is it from PT?
It's not from who? It's not from PD. It's from Jesse.
Okay.
PD.
Oh yes, yes. please do read this. We really do appreciate these
This is live.
messages.
This is live. Dave Palace just subscribed to the podcast.
What? Get the air horn.
A shout out right. Yeah. So
Dave Palace.
Boop, boop. Such a good bit. This is one of our greatest bits. Dave Palace, thank you for subscribing at $7 a month. We are just killing it. So, yes, those three gentlemen. The email we got, it's from a gentleman named, I'm so old I have to take my glasses off
I enjoyed it. It was very dramatic.
Jesse Pressler. Jesse, thank you for your service from Durham, United States of America. Gentlemen, thank you for Die Hard on a Blank. It has given me much joy over these past months. This year work took me on the road, and the long drives have made space for much podcast listening and catching up with missed episodes of DHOAB. It's led me to your guest appearances on other great shows like 50 Miles Per Hour and Eye of the Duck. Your show has given me much happiness while I meander in my decrepit mind palace through the histories of movies that made me. I'm thrilled about this next endeavor, 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. I have a sneaking suspicion that my favorite, Midnight Run, will make an appearance. Looking forward to that and the probable 4-hour-long episode on Lethal Weapon. Well,
how long
Jesse,
was this today?
it was less than that.
It was not quite.
No,
but...
I will be smashing the subscribe button on that program. Warm regards and Merry Christmas, Jesse.
Amazing.
Thank you, Jesse.
That really did. It warms my heart that to hear. We want to give you guys like some fun and company on your long drives or whatever you guys are doing over the holidays. And thanks for being with us and part of our.
We do it for the fans,
our pod family,
and the millions of dollars we make on each episode. But that's a separate thing.
Yeah,
that's just my ruthless capitalism.
So yeah, that's
Merry Christmas.
That's all I got. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll love you guys.
See you in 2025.
And yeah,
with some waterlogged cinema and some LA looks.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.